very mysterious disappearance of actress Jean Spangler fits that LA noir true crime narrative so very well, with theories that she was killed by a major Hollywood movie star, or that perhaps the mob did her in, or that she was even the victim of the Black Dahlia killer. But with all of these stories that are out there about Jean, I've never really gotten an idea of who she was. So I set out to, give this woman some sort of backstory. She was a human being, not just some character in one of LA's oldest cold cases. So we're going to learn just a little bit about who Jean Spangler was before she became famous for really all of the wrong reasons. I know that if we all look back far enough, we'll find out that we're related to some very notable people. I've got Alexander Hamilton on my family tree, but in Jean's case, she is related to Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. Jean's grandmother was Abe's third cousin, and she died right here in this house in March of 1931. I found an article from the Los Angeles Times announcing her death, and it listed this address as the home of her daughter, Florence Spangler, Jean's mother. Now, Grandma, she was born and raised a pioneer woman in Missouri. She had 9 children there, including Florence, who brought her ailing mother out here to take care of her while she recovered from her illness. But that only lasted a few months. She died at the age of 75. Little Jean was only 7 years old when Grandma died, and I'm guessing that Florence rented this house for her mother and that she and Jean never actually lived here. For starters, Jean had 3 siblings. Add in both her mom and dad, and it's just too many people living here in this 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home built in 1923. Now, the Spanglers, they moved here from Seattle. That's where little Jean Elizabeth Spangler was born on September 2nd, 1923, the same year this house was built. And I checked the records of this house, and it last sold in 1970 for the shocking sum of $17,000. Today, its estimated value is close to $900,000. The Spanglers moved around quite a bit, but always stuck to Highland Park and always rented. Few of their other places no longer exist, but this beautiful gem still proudly stands, with renovations, of course. It's a duplex. This was the Spangler side. The family was living here when the Neighborhood Herald announced the engagement of Jean's older sister Betsy on January 14th, 1938. Jean was 15 and her older sister, the bride-to-be, was just 18. Jean, she was a baby in the family. The girls had 2 brothers, Richard and Eddie, and all 4 kids were born within a 5-year span. Florence and her husband, Cecil Martin Spangler, must have been exhausted, especially from moving around so much. Martin, as he was known, he hailed from Virginia. He and his wife Florence, they made their way across country to Washington, where they settled down and began having their 4 kids. But another article from the Highland Park Herald featured Martin as the manager of a brand new car dealership boasting the hot brand new car models of 1931. So while it's tough to pinpoint exactly when Jean and her family moved to LA, we do know that they were here in the very early 1930s. Highland Park, one of the earliest established neighborhoods in Los Angeles, is one of those extremely charming neighborhoods that feels worlds away from the hustle and bustle of Hollywood life. But it's also one of those neighborhoods that, if you live here yet dream about that hustle and bustle Hollywood life, you're only 11 miles from it all. It took me just a little over 15 minutes to get here from Hollywood, and they were among the earliest to embrace Hollywood. Film star Norma Shear was on hand to help open the Highland Theater here in 1925. It was one of those enormous, grand theaters, but has since been remodeled into 3 separate theaters. They show brand new movies here, and I don't think that there's a ticket over $10. Their matinees are like $5. And although I have no proof, I would bet at all that Jean sat inside these walls daydreaming that the actresses she was watching on screen would one day be her. I mean, not only was this theater right in her backyard, but she wanted that career. She chased it, and she started early, modeling while she was in high school. And, there has always been some form of social media. Jean, she was part of social media, the media, of course, being newspapers. But they had a social section, and Jean, she popped up a few times as Franklin High School student Jean Spangler, model/entertainer, for various functions around Highland Park. It's actually kind of a trip reading some of those old newspapers. They would post the silliest stories, like Mrs. So-and-so of so-and-so street had a birthday, and Mrs. So-and-so of so-and-so street attended. I mean, it's really not that different from today. I don't know. But neither really is Highland Park. I love it. There is sort of a gritty charm to it that I love. Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas called Highland Park home. Jackson Browne moved here when I think he was 3. And Diane Keaton was raised here before going to high school in Santa Ana. But this right here is where Jean and her family lived while she was in high school. According to the 1940 consensus, the Spanglers were living here in this house, which was built in 1906. I've done a lot of these tours now, and I don't think I've ever featured a house this old. Not one that's still serving as a house. Well, actually, it's a duplex. 2 units, each with 3 bedrooms. And Jean's oldest brother, Richard, he was living at home while attending college. As we know, her sister Betsy was married now and living elsewhere with her husband. And Jean's brother, Eddie, who was 2 years older, he had already graduated high school and joined the Army Air Corps. While he was in the Midwest, he met and married his wife, Sophie, in 1942. Tragically, 3 years later, on June 1st, 1945, during World War II, Eddie's aircraft, it disappeared off the coast of Japan. A search and rescue team was put together, but Eddie's body was never found, and he left behind his wife, Sophie, and their new baby girl, interestingly named Jeannie. Well, this loss obviously devastated the Spanglers, and tragically, wouldn't be the only one of Martin and Florence's children whose body would never be returned to them. If Jean walked to school, it probably only took mere minutes. We're not that far from where we just were. And there are a lot of schools in the LA area that look exactly the same when they opened. This is not one of them. Benjamin Franklin High School was established right here in 1916, but a lot of it has been renovated. Jean, she graduated from here in 1941, and there is just nothing out there. I mean, I haven't found any books or articles or even podcasts, nothing that talks about her life prior to Hollywood. All of my research on her early life, it's been limited to newspaper articles, but I did come across her yearbook, and from the looks of it, she was an outgoing and social student. She was even listed in the ice skating club. So fun. My high school did not have an ice skating club. Did yours? Really, though, Jean just seemed like your all-American teenager. All of the photos in the yearbook, they paint that picture, that 1940s Americana. I don't know, this school just kind of has a Midwest vibe to it. We're in LA, but it's just that Highland Park charm. And the school, it's always been home to the Panthers. Jean Spangler was a Panther. So was I, actually, but in elementary school. I feel like everyone's a Panther in elementary school. But other notable Panthers here include Alan Arkin. He graduated a decade after Jean in 1951. Bobby Riggs, the male tennis player who infamously challenged Billie Jean King to a tennis match in the 70s and then lost to her, he went here. And so did Gene Roddenberry, the creator and writer of Star Trek. He graduated in 1939, just a couple of years before Gene, which means they could have very well passed each other in the hallways. Anyway, it probably didn't surprise anyone that show business was her goal. I mean, by the time she was in high school, she knew she wanted to pursue that life in showbiz, and in order to do so, she'd have to start getting her feet wet a little further away, in Hollywood. Jean dipped her toes into the world of the professional world of show business by becoming a dancer. One of her first gigs was here at the Florentine Gardens. It opened on December 28, 1938, and was designed by architect Gordon Kaufman. He also did the Hollywood Palladium, which is just a couple blocks away from us. He did the Greystone Mansion, the LA Times building, and that little thing called the Hoover Dam. But as the golden age of Hollywood was booming, so was the golden age of restaurants and nightlife. Now, most of the big-name places that are still remembered today, the ones you hear about, they were located in Beverly Hills or on the famous Sunset Strip. But across town here on Hollywood Boulevard was this place, which catered to more of LA's working class, and it was completely free for servicemen. But everyone else dished out $1.25 for the cover charge, or $2.40 would also get you dinner. And this place still has a very large dance floor. It can hold up to 500 people. And there would be big shows here, complete with dancers, and one of those dancers was Jean Spangler. But this is wild. In 1942, Norma Jean Baker, who had not yet changed her name to Marilyn Monroe, got married to a man named Jim Doherty. He was 20, Norma Jean was 16. Geesh. And coming off a really tragic upbringing, clearly. They wed in a small ceremony in Westwood and celebrated their reception here at one of Norma's favorite clubs, Florentine Gardens. Now, there is no proof, no evidence whatsoever that Jean even crossed paths with Norma Jean, but they were both affiliated with this place at the same time. So it does kind of make you wonder. I mean, you have to wonder. And speaking of wondering, LA's most notorious unsolved murder of all time, the Black Dahlia. Elizabeth Short was her name, and her body was found severed in half in an empty lot on January 15th, 1947. 10 days later, her purse was found in a dumpster, and inside of it was an address book. The cover had the printed name of Mark Hansen on it. Mark was the owner of the Florentine Gardens, and Elizabeth had even at one point rented a room from him on that street that we're looking at straight ahead. I'm pretty sure Jean was no longer dancing here when Elizabeth was murdered, but there are some theories out there connecting the two women, but more on that later. By 1948, with the war over, business declined and the gardens closed. It soon became the Cotton Club, where black entertainers could perform. That dissolved in 1954, and then, strangely enough, it became a dental school. Eventually, it returned to entertainment as a salsa rock club. Then, in 1979, it was bought and returned to its former name, the Florentine Gardens, which it remains today. Really flourished in the 1990s, and it's just as lively today. Well, not today, but this weekend it will be packed. They still have live music, but a ton of DJ events. Directly across from his Hollywood Palladium design sits another Gordon Kaufman architectural gem, the Earl Carroll Theater. Jean, she liked that world of nightclub dancing enough to continue pursuing it, and at just 18 years old, she became one of Earl's dancers here. Now, as you can see, it's closed and boarded up, but it is in the process of a renovation project with an expected grand opening to return it to its former glory, hopefully very soon. These condo developers did not get their way. It's not going anywhere, thankfully. But unfortunately, this black wall with the Argyle movie posters on it is blocking most of our view. But anyway, the Earl Carroll Theater, it actually opened just 2 days before the Florentine Gardens. This one on December 26, 1938. Big year for Hollywood nightclubs. And the opening ceremony was called From Broadway to Hollywood. And it featured 60 showgirls and 135 feet worth of stairs for them to climb up. And David O. Selznick, Claudette Colbert, Marlene Dietrich, Errol Flynn, Betty Grable, Dolores Del Rio, they were just a few of the celebrities on hand to celebrate the opening. Earl Carroll was what they call a showman. He produced and directed and wrote and composed, a man of many hats, and not surprisingly, a heterosexual showman of that era who loved women, and lots and lots and lots of them. In fact, his entire career revolved around lots of women. He had been successful in New York City, but in 1926, he got himself in major trouble for throwing a party that included a naked lady in a bathtub full of champagne. Well, word of that party ended up in the newspaper, and authorities ended up charging Carroll, who actually went to trial and was sentenced to 1 year in jail. I think he only served 6 months. He eventually made his way out here to LA, bringing his flair for entertainment to the West Coast, which had not yet actually hit Las Vegas. This whole idea of big, lavish dancers and numbers during dinner. The theater was a smash out here, and Carroll's partner, I don't think they were ever married. She was an actress and a singer named Beryl Wallace, like Meryl Streep, but with a B. Her face was the club's logo. It was plastered on the front of the building, and the words, "Eat at the Theater," all within the word theater, would light up. And in 1940, the Philco radio show was broadcast from inside the theater here, and from this came a tradition that the Chinese theater had, the name and handprints and blocks of cement. Only here, the cemented squares hung on the front of the building. But it was the women that the Earl Carroll Theater was most famous for. I mean, Earl boasted having the most beautiful girls in the world, and I can't say that he was wrong. Not only did he have Jean, but he had a handful of other dancers who went on to become famous. Yvonne DiCarlo, the gorgeous actress, ironically most known for playing Lily Munster on The Munsters, she danced here. So did Phyllis Coates, TV's first Lois Lane. I talked a lot about her in my George Reeves story location tour, but she was still alive then. She just passed away at the age of 96 in October of last year. Also, movie star Mamie Van Doren danced here, and she is still alive. As a matter of fact, she's in her 90s, and I just asked her to come on my show, so fingers crossed. But tragically, in 1948, Beryl and Earl died in a plane crash. The club didn't survive either, and in 1953, a Vegas showman took over and renamed it Moulin Rouge. It lasted into the 60s, and in late 1965, the theater became the Hullabaloo. It was a very popular rock and roll club, which was rare in that it allowed minors into the club. There was also a companion television variety show filmed here called Hullabaloo. In 1968, it morphed into the Kaleidoscope and catered to West Coast rock groups, one of which was The Doors. I mean, how could they not perform at a place called Kaleidoscope? But it even got more psychedelic when it was renamed the Aquarius Theater in 1968. Can you guess why it was called that in 1968? Because, of course, it housed the LA production of the hit musical Hair. That show, it ran for a record-breaking 2 years. But unfortunately, the wall of fame that hung here was removed, and poor Beryl's face came down. And as fun as it would be to say that this is the original artwork of the Aquarius Theater, it's not. In 2018, Quentin Tarantino's production team turned the theater back into the Aquarius for a very quick scene in his brilliant film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and production left their design up. And I don't want to get too sidetracked, but some other fun facts. In 1983, the TV show Star Search used the theater, and in the 90s, it became one of Nickelodeon's studios. Carly, Drake and Josh, The Amanda Show, and all that happened to film here. And yours truly happened to appear in all that. A handful of episodes. If you want to see a clip and learn more about that fun fact, check out my Instagram, The Justin Root Show. I posted a clip there recently, and I'm going to talk all about being on that show and filming scenes inside of this theater on my podcast, which is coming out very soon. Sorry, I'll stop plugging. Anyway, Nickelodeon eventually moved to Burbank, and in 2016, this building was declared a historical cultural monument. And I don't want to get anyone's hopes up for the plans for this place, but they're really supposed to have it resembling the old Earl Carroll Theater, complete with Beryl on the neon sign. So here's to hoping. I'm sure Jean just had men throwing themselves at her. How could they not? Dancing at all these popular night spots, but she already had someone, a guy named Dexter Benner, and they married on June 28, 1942 at the Hollywood Beverly Christian Church, which has since been torn down and replaced with apartments. However, 10 miles west of Hollywood, here in Cheviot Hills, sits this 3-bedroom house built in 1930, and it's the house where Jean's wedding shower took place. A friend and bridesmaid of Jean's, Patricia McCauley, used this house, which was her parents' place, to throw the party for Jean, which of course made the social section of the newspaper. Old social media again. Anyway, Jean was only 19 and Dexter was 22. He was in the business of manufacturing glass and plastics, and the relationship was rocky from the very beginning. Jean claimed that Dexter was cruel to her, and subsequently, while he was off serving in the military, she reportedly began an affair with a man. Clearly, they weren't meant to be married, and Jean ended up filing for divorce 6 months after the wedding. However, they worked something out because they remained in an on-again, off-again, tumultuous relationship, yet very passionate because Jean gave birth to their only child, Christine Benner, on April 22nd, 1944. They separated for good in 46, and once the divorce was official, Dexter was granted custody of Christine because in court he convincingly told the judge that Jean had been unfaithful in their marriage, and he claimed that she was a wild party glamour girl. Well, Jean would not accept this, so she took him to court, and they went back and forth until in 1948, when a judge found Dexter's claims to be baseless and also said that Christine's place was with her mother, and Jean was granted the custody that she had fought so hard to get. And I'm sorry, if you want to talk about social media of the day, Jean and Dexter weren't even famous, not celebrities at all, yet their custody battle played out daily in numerous LA newspapers. Those of you who watched my last story location tour will have a better understanding of where we are now. The Miracle Mile, more specifically, Park La Brea, the largest apartment complex in America. Now, it's recognized from having 18 13-story towers, as well as these smaller units that surround the complex, bringing the total to a whopping 4,200 units. Most of the property is gated, but these units are very accessible because they sit on the outer rim. And they were built during the first phase of construction, which was completed in 1944. So they were relatively new when Jean was living here in 1949. And by now, Jean's daughter Christine was 5 years old. Jean, as we know, was a struggling actress, and I'm sure all of her custody battles with Dexter were just brutal on her finances. So Jean and little Christine were living here with Jean's mother, Florence, right here in this unit with the bright red door. And on October 7th, 1949, the bedrooms behind that red door were being occupied by Jean, little Christine, and Jean's sister-in-law, Sophie, the widow of Jean's brother Eddie, the one lost in the war. Well, Florence was in Kentucky visiting family, so Sophie was here helping Jean out with Christine. All of Jean's family were in complete support of her raising Christine. None of them really liked Dexter. They also painted Jean as a great mother, but nonetheless, she was a working mother, an actress in Hollywood, which of course meant all sorts of random, chaotic hours and schedules. October 7th was no different. The plan was that Sophie was going to be watching Christine all night. Jean had spent the day with her daughter, but she had plans for the rest of the night. She told Sophie she was going to meet up with Dexter to discuss his late child support check, aka get her damn money. She also told Sophie that she was booked to work on the set of a film that would be shooting on location way into the night hours. So, somewhere between 5 and 5:30, Jean said her goodbyes right here at this door. She gave little Christine a hug and a kiss, and as she said goodbye to Sophie, she leaned in and quietly said, "Wish me luck," and gave her sister-in-law a wink. Jean then walked down her porch steps out onto Colgate Avenue here and started walking north towards 3rd Street. About 5.5 miles from where I'm now standing in Griffith Park, on that following morning of October 8th, Sophie Spangler was waking up with an uneasy feeling about Jean. As morning was turning into afternoon, turning into early evening, she grew worried enough to head to the Wilshire Division Police Department to report Jean missing. It just was not like her to not come home or at least check in. Christine, she was wondering where her mommy was, and Sophie was growing more and more worried, but the police, they just sort of brushed it off, yeah, people skip town all the time, or she'll probably show up soon. Unfortunately, they couldn't do anything about it, so Sophie and little Christine had to go to bed that night, feeling hopeless. Things only went from bad to worse when, less than 48 hours after Jean Spangler walked out her front door, a Griffith Park employee found her purse on the ground just outside the Ferndale entrance. The exact location is a little north, about a 5-minute walk, but we'll go in this entrance so that you can get a better idea just what the Ferndale area of Griffith Park is all about. The newspapers will tell you that October 9th morning in 1949 was overcast and dreary when they found Jean's purse. It was like that this morning, but the sun is fighting its way out. Regardless, the sun rarely makes its way into this covered oasis of greenery, which is why back in 1914, the city started planting ferns under this canopy of trees that has natural running water through it. The ferns just, thrive in this kind of environment, and there are hundreds of species of ferns growing throughout here. If you've never explored Ferndale and you get the chance, do it. It's a hidden gem of a trail, and here's the best part. Even in the dead of summer, it's pretty cool in here. The shade is just great for people who might want to be outside but not necessarily in the sun. And it's pretty flat, so it makes for a terrific leisurely stroll. If you know me, you know I have to connect everything in pop culture. So while we're here, silent film heartthrob Rudolph Valentino, he filmed 1922's The Young Rajah here, and it was used as recently as 2016 for Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone to stroll through in La La Land. But perhaps the most, ironic moment is that Norma Jean, who was now divorced and using the name Marilyn Monroe, she did a photo shoot here in 1950, shortly after Jean disappeared, but the photos didn't become public until Life magazine published them in 2009. Henry, the Griffith Park employee who found Jean's purse, immediately notified the police, and suddenly they were now interested in Sophie's missing persons report. And the contents of Jean's purse were even more baffling than the fact that it was found so far from where she was last seen. For starters, the straps on it were torn, clearly an indication that there was some sort of struggle. Police ruled out robbery right away, though. Sophie confirmed that Jean mentioned she had no cash on her at all when she left to meet Dexter. Also, there was some jewelry and valuables still inside, so any random mugger or thief wouldn't have left it. Also inside were a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes, a small address book, Jean's ID, her Screen Actors Guild card and her Background Extras Guild card. That doesn't exist anymore. They merged with SAG in 1992. But the most piece of, evidence inside of Jean's purse was a handwritten note confirmed by Jean's family to be her handwriting that said, "Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." And there was, and continues to be, a lot of speculation about this note. First of all, was it a comma or a period after the last word? Some say period, that's it. Others think Jean was stopped mid-sentence, that it was a comma and that she had more to say since she didn't sign her name. Either way, who are the names mentioned? And more importantly, was Jean Spangler anywhere inside the 4,300-acre Griffith Park? Griffith Park is huge, bigger than Central Park. In fact, it's one of the largest urban parks in North America, just massive. It's home to the Griffith Park Observatory and the Hollywood sign, of course. It's also in my backyard. I'm a 3-minute walk from the park. There is so much history here and a lot of stories that could be told, but that day, it was Jean's story that would dominate the newspapers, not just here, but really all over the country. Not only that, but it would kick off a manhunt that would involve a search party of over 200 police officers and volunteers, including about 60 people searching for Jean on horseback in order to help search this vast park. They started up at the observatory and worked their way back down to Ferndale, and they would search for days. Oh, it's just a little too difficult to capture. You have to be walking at the right angle to see, but the observatory is right there behind those trees. It's much more visible in older photos from this view, but this is the area where Jean's purse was found. Henry was unlocking the gates at sunrise when he found it. Adding even more mystery is the timing. See, Jean was last seen the night of the 7th, right? But her purse was not here the following morning, which would have been the 8th, or any time during that day, and it wasn't here when the gates were being locked that night. It means the purse had to have been disposed sometime on the night of the 8th or very early before Henry opened up Ferndale. One other thing worth mentioning for those who might think, hey, maybe the purse was tossed out the window while someone was driving. Possible, but you have to know, this road isn't some sort of cut through. Nobody was taking Ferndale Road to get anywhere but Ferndale. And if you were coming here at night, you were coming here for some very adult reasons, or perhaps something worse. And to this day, there have been no signs that Jean Spangler was ever even in this park, except for her purse.